Hello, and welcome to our webinar on utilizing AAC to enhance language, speech, and literacy for children with autism. I'm Amy Cook, BCBA and Community Manager from Rasmus, and I want to go over a few things before we get started. First, you will be eligible to earn one free CEU if you're watching this live and complete a few requirements. We will share 3 keywords throughout the webinar that you will need to write down. After the webinar, I will share an online form to complete, and you will type in the 3 keywords to confirm your participation. A recording will be sent out to all registrants. However, only live participants are eligible to earn the CEU. The first keyword is spread, S-P-R-E-A-D, spread. Before I hand it over to our fabulous guest speakers, I want to share a little bit more about Rasmus. Rasmus is an ABA clinical software company that was inspired by our founder's son, Rasmus, who was diagnosed with autism early on in his life. Our goal is to help deliver the highest quality behavioral therapy services to 1 million children with autism by helping the people who help them: behavioral analysts, techs, teachers, parents, and clinical directors. We provide the best clinical platform so you can keep the focus on the child in front of you. Our team wanted to kickstart AAC Awareness Month with an exciting webinar with Linggo. With that said, I will let Jane and Ling get us started with introductions.
Thank you so much, Amy. It's so lovely to see all of you here today. My name is Jane, and I'm a BCBA from Ontario, Canada, and I am extremely passionate about using evidence-based practice when we're using AAC. So my background is working with children with autism and other developmental disabilities. I've had the privilege of working in this field for over a decade now, and I have a strong interest in collaboration across different professionals, mainly with speech-language pathologists, because I find it very valuable to marry the science of behavior analysis along with looking at the sequencing and child development that can inform us in our clinical practice. Right now at Linggo, I am the Chief Clinical Officer, which means I have the privilege of not only working directly with children, individuals, families, but also doing a little bit of case study research and training at the organizational level. And I'm joined today by Ling Li Tan, and I'll kick it over to you, Ling.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ling. I'm a board-certified behavior analyst, CEO and founder of Linggo. I've been working in the field for about 19 years. I first started in this field by babysitting a little boy with autism, and he was not speaking. In a few short months, I was being trained by one of the first behavior analysts in Canada, and he ended up learning to speak. And that's when I fell in love with the field. Over the years, just kind of talking about my journey into creating Linggo, over the years, I worked with a lot of children, many of them who didn't end up going on to learn how to speak or communicate. So we required the use of AAC. And throughout my career, I found it quite frustrating and challenging to find adequate AAC interventions and the tools that would effectively serve these children to help them meet their communicative potential, specifically going beyond requesting and building onto tacting and building intraverbal skills, and also literacy as well. So that's when I ventured on to create Linggo and also build an incredible team around me to develop training protocols. And I hope you all learn a lot from this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ling. So I'm just sharing my screen here so we can dive in. And I want you to take a look at this title and note that there are quite a few keywords in it. So when Ling and I were asked to do a presentation during AAC Awareness Month, we really thought, what can our big takeaways be and what do we want everyone to get out of this? And what you'll notice in this presentation is that we really unpack AAC and AAC specifically for children with autism. And so what we're going to do today is go through a high-level overview of language, speech, and literacy specifically for children with autism. We have packed the presentation with a lot of different research articles, and what we've done is we've taken a snapshot and given you the takeaway. But what we really hope today is it's a launch pad for you to learn more and do a deeper dive into the areas that are more relevant for you. So with that being said, we've broken down these learning objectives for today. We're going to really define AAC and then take a look at AAC again for children with autism. We'll discuss how to use assistive tech during functional communication training. We'll look through some of the foundational skills associated with the high success rates of a high-tech speech generating device. And then we'll go through AAC system designs, behavioral programming strategies, and again, leave a little bit of time for Q&A. But we really hope this is the start of your learning journey when it comes to AAC. All right, so you've already met Ling and I, and before we get to our exciting content, we just want to make some disclosures here. So Ling and I both work for Linggo, and Linggo has its own software for high-tech speech generating devices. However, we want the focus of today to be on AAC in general, not just Linggo's software. So you will see lots of examples of Linggo in action, but we really encourage you to take the strategies and the procedures discussed in the presentation today rather than just using Linggo. AAC is absolutely not a one-size-fits-all. So wanted to state that from the beginning. We will also be using both person-first language as well as identity-first language throughout the presentation. And you'll also see some videos of AAC users in action. So please do not take any videos or screenshots. We will be sharing the slides of the presentation afterwards. Amy will help us distribute those. And as Amy mentioned, there will also be a recording. We also have a little ethics game throughout the presentation. So this symbol here is going to be your SD to think about which ethical code is matching what we're talking about. So keep an eye out for that throughout the presentation. All right, and with all of that, we're excited to get started here. So let's start with the basics, defining AAC. So take a look at all of these different images, and you'll see topographically, they're very different. But what the similarity between all of them is that they're all different systems of AAC. So augmentative and alternative communication is anything that can augment or help or complement or completely replace your vocal speech. This can further be broken down into aided versus unaided AAC. Aided AAC requires an additional tool as well as your motor movements in order to use. And they could be different types of motor movements. If it's something like a tablet here, it requires possibly your hands. There can be different eye gazing technology used. There can be stick shift used with the mouth. So body motor movements plus an external tool. Whereas unaided AAC just requires your body. So here's some different examples of both of those. And I want to further add to this tree. When we're looking at AAC systems, it can be further broken down into high tech, mid tech, low tech, or no tech. So picture it as a spectrum going across the screen here for the level of technology needed. And now you can see that there are lots of different types, forms, topographies of AAC. So what we really want to look at, especially during AAC Awareness Month, is looking at which type of AAC system you're talking about when you're using them. So adding some temporal context, communication boards were first used way back in 1920. And you can see that the developments in high-tech AAC are quite recent. So it wasn't until 2008 when the Apple App Store was launched. And during this launch in 2008, there were about 500 apps available. Fast forward to 2020, when there was the iPad 8 launch, there were hundreds of just AAC apps available. And now when we look today, I feel like there's a new app coming out every day related to AAC. So there are lots of different options. But what I want you to consider is the young field of behavior analysis. I have 1968, where the seminal Bear-Wolf and Risley article came out. Between 1968 to today in 2023, that's a very small amount of time. And when we look at this explosion of tech in 2020 till today, that's only 3 years. Research really hasn't caught up in terms of what's effective in terms of AAC software. So we're looking at some very new research, and we have a lot of gaps that aren't filled. Now, that's our conversation on AAC. Now, what's really important is to look at AAC specifically for individuals with autism or with autistic people. Further, you may want to break that down to children with autism. So wanted to pull up this chart here, which is taken from an article that looked at the percentage of intervention research papers. And this is a snapshot between 1985 and 2014. And you can see that only 9% of those studies that were published on AAC included autistic populations. So we have a limited research body, even more limited when it comes to the population we're looking at. What we also want to consider here is, what is the quality of research being done? So here's a breakdown of some different things that we've noticed, different trends in the research, that when we're looking for AAC, particularly for children with autism, we know that autism can impact individuals very differently. And when we're looking at the function of augmenting or replacing vocal speech, and we're looking at communication, there can be lots of different areas of communication that we want to help support. It could be pragmatics, it could be used for semantics, it could be used to help with language delays, advancing grammatical development. But what we do know, thanks to Laura and colleagues' 2022 systematic research and comprehensive research study, is that most of these studies included teaching individuals to mand for preferred items using nouns. So again, we're taking research that's already limited and finding that most of it is just focusing on requesting for individuals with autism. What we can say with confidence as a blanket statement is that AAC for children with autism is typically recommended to ensure that these children do not establish patterns of communication failure. Another consideration with AAC is, again, we're looking at not only communication skills, but also language skills, as well as social skills, and the interlap and overlay between these 3 domains. So what we're going to really drive home today is the importance of individualization when it comes to selecting and teaching an AAC system. Would highly recommend the review of this presentation that was done by Tracy Lindblad and Lilith Ruder-Yule back in 2022 at the National Autism Conference. And this is a 3-hour presentation that goes through dynamic AAC assessment. So this is looking at assessing those 3 main domains and how to actually go about applying that for individuals. If we had all the time in the world, we could look more into that today, but I'll leave you with a recommendation to go ahead and dive into this presentation. Also want to highlight this big takeaway, that the research is really not about using a specific type of hardware or finding the best possible app, but it's more about a combination of 3 things. We want to look at the hardware, we want to look at the software, and arguably most importantly, we want to look at the training protocols. And all 3 must work together in order to have a functional and effective speech generating device and AAC system. All right, so taking all of that context into consideration, now let's make a behavior analytic framework and take a functional perspective to our system design. So one of the questions that comes up most often when we're looking at AAC is, what are the prerequisite skills or the foundational skills? And again, I'll go back to recommendation to go through a thorough dynamic assessment. But what can be agreed on in general is that if you are particularly using a high-tech picture-based speech generating device, you would like to look at the presence of these foundational skills. For example, gross and fine motor skills. If the individual is using a tablet, are they able to, one, carry the tablet, and two, do they have the fine motor skills to be able to scan, to swipe and select the pictures used? And you can also use something called a feature matching assessment to go through and see which types of gross and fine motor skills may be needed according to each system. You'll also want to consider visual discrimination. So can the individual scan an increasing array of images? You'll also want to consider simple and conditional discrimination skills. If you're using a selection-based system, such as a picture-based SGD, then conditional discrimination skills will be something that are highly important. I would also recommend to take a look at Jack Michael's article, which focuses on selection-based versus topography-based communication systems or systems of verbal behavior. So again, we're looking at with a topographical system, you wouldn't necessarily require those conditional discrimination skills because you're not making a selection from an array. So think of when you're speaking or when you're writing, you have motor movements that are individual to each word that's being said. So you don't require those conditional discrimination skills or selecting from an array that you do if you are using a picture-based system. All right, my rant is over on those discrimination skills, but it's so important to consider. Joint attention. As mentioned, when you're using an AAC system, that social piece is required because there's always going to be a listener receiving your message. So you're looking at, are those initial joint attention skills in place? Can that individual share attention with a partner? Imitation. This is a very important skill depending on the type of prompt you're using. If you're using a prompt that requires the individual to imitate back, ensure that a generalized imitative repertoire is there. We also want to consider that the individual is able to tolerate delayed access to the item they're requesting. So with this one, you want to think of individuals who are looking for a system to help replace their challenging behaviors. And this is when you're introducing FCT. So if this is a skill that's not present, you want to incorporate it in the teaching procedures. Lastly, PECS users. So it's been suggested by Bondi et al. That individuals who go through the initial phases of PECS will be more likely to transition successfully to a picture-based speech generating device. So PECS, or the Picture Exchange Communication System, is the only evidence-based practice or is the only AAC system that meets criteria to be an EBP. So it's a fantastic system. And if you look at those initial phases of PECS, you're really teaching those initial social communication skills, such as joint attention, such as building conditional discrimination that are mentioned here. So as you can see, lots of different skill areas that are important for using a system like a high-tech picture-based SGD. Before going to that slide, just want to drive one more point home that sometimes individuals are sometimes it's shared between clinicians. I've seen on social media, unfortunately, quite a bit during AAC Awareness Month, that there's no prerequisite skills needed to access an AAC system. So would like to really drive the point home that I challenge that. I do think that there are some very important skills that need to be present in order to successfully use a picture-based speech generating device. All right, so moving on to the next bit. We've looked at the history of AAC. We've looked at the importance of assessment. Now let's look at vocabulary and target selection. So these are the most common questions that we on the Linggo team receive from clinicians who are introducing a new AAC system. What role does motivation play? Should I be using core words versus fringe words? Should I be considering the developmental age or the developmental level of the user? So there's a lot of questions here. And I would like to point to a really great article that was released at the beginning of this year by Frick and colleagues. And this answers the question of considering the developmental level of the individual and whether or not a core vocabulary list should be used. So for some background, a core vocabulary list looks at the lexical items, and they are focused on words that are more central and almost indispensable to language use. So these are very general words, such as more. They have multiple purposes and multiple contexts. And what the authors of this article found were that many of the words included in core words are not included in vocabulary that are seen in early development. So those really early words that first come up are underrepresented in the core vocabulary lists. And I want you to think right now of some users that you've been working with or some learners and think about what those first words are. I can't remember the name of the researcher, but one of them was saying, my daughter's first word was lawnmower because that's what was most motivating to her. And that's something that absolutely would not appear on a core vocabulary list. So definitely want to consider, specifically for children with autism, want to consider what is motivating for that individual. We know this from early man training, from FCT, what's motivating and then what's developmentally appropriate, and start going from there. So with all of that considered, this is what we want the main takeaway message to be. Focus on the individual in front of you. Again, AAC is under-researched. It's very under-researched for individuals with autism, and language, speech, and communication are quite complex. So while we're waiting for all the research to catch up, we really encourage the use of individualized procedures and the use of evidence-based strategies. Again, we're not looking at putting a system in front of an individual and hoping that they'll run with it. We're looking at using the strategies that we know for other modalities, looking at what the AAC research says, and really looking at the individualization of these systems. It's also interesting because our team at Linggo has used this now for quite some time. And I saw on Amy's slide in the beginning that Rasmus also says, focus on the child in front of you. And Rasmus is such a great system because it does allow for you to focus on the child rather than worrying about all the other things you have to with your data collection. So in this context, we really want this to speak to the individualization necessary for AAC systems. All right, so back to our discussion on system design. I want to introduce two different concepts here. So when we're talking about system design, we're talking about specifically high-tech speech generating devices that are using picture-based designs. So this is the way that the vocabulary appears to the individual. So our two words that we want to look at are taxonomic and schematic. So here's an example of a taxonomic display, and that's a grid-based display. So your vocabulary is arranged in rows and columns. Next word we want to introduce is a schematic display. So this is taken from early childhood development when we're looking at the building of schemes. So think of this as you're organizing your vocabulary based on themes or based on context. Really great study was done by Cindy Gavarder and her students out at the University of New Mexico, and they wanted to see if there's a difference between different system designs, specifically for children with autism. There had been research done before that suggested that schematic systems were easier for young children to use. The children in those studies were typically developing. So Dr. Gavarder's students wanted to look at, is this true for autistic individuals as well? So they took a small group of children with autism, and they taught them a two-step manding procedure using 3 different types: a schematic visual scene display, as you can see an example here, a taxonomic grid, and a hybrid pop-up grid. And what they found was that 3 of the 4 students mastered the schematic systems, but could not get the taxonomic grid. 2 of them were able to generalize their requesting to both novel locations and novel stimuli. And there was a 4th participant who mastered all 3 formats, but only reached generalization with the schematic visual scene display. So our takeaways from this study are that absolutely system design does have an impact on learning. This study in particular extended the results to autistic populations. Some of the discussions around using schematic displays as opposed to taxonomic displays is that they may place lower cognitive or developmental demands on the user as opposed to a taxonomic system. So as a behavior analyst, I interpret that as it's lower response effort to use a schematic system as opposed to a taxonomic grid. So really great study, and we've left the resource or the references there if you'd like to take a deeper dive in there. All right, so let's take a look at 2 different system designs in action. So you'll see an example of Linggo's display, but again, I encourage you to look at whatever system is suitable for your learner and really analyze how is the vocabulary displayed. All right, so we're in Linggo's communicator, and you can see that the vocabulary is sorted into context. So we've got what they're motivated for, conversation, and play as an even more specific topic. So here's a look at your schematic design.
I want eat cookies. I want to eat cookies.
Right, so again, we can see that, for example, cookies is contextually relevant to eat. So when they're choosing the verb eat, nouns that are relevant to it are now coming up, and they can be sorted according to meals, snacks, whatever's relevant for that individual. Now let's take a look at a taxonomic style grid. So we'll just back that up a little bit so you can see for this display, individuals are starting from a blank slate, and there you see is that familiar grid style. So they're going to construct a tact here.
Big. Brown. Bear. It is a big brown bear.
So already you can see the difference between these 2 different types of systems. Think about the complexity of the response, the man versus the tact, and think about the prerequisite skills that would be needed for each of these 2 system displays. Also want to introduce what a hybrid style might look like. So lots of AAC systems have this option. So in Linggo's communicator, which is again a schematic display, you'll notice that every time a word tile is presented, there's a hybrid option that will pop up. So the individual can access that grid type display and expand upon their sentence. Clinicians have really liked using this for modeling or for adding it as an extra step into the procedure. So again, type of system design depends on the skill of the individual and on what your target, your goal is for that individual learner. All right, so let's take a look at the system designs in action. This is a young man who's in online school. So this is his class on the laptop here. This was during the pandemic, so he's doing virtual school for this lesson. And you'll see he's going to go between the schematic display, which has been customized for his school program, and he'll be also using a simplified taxonomic grid. So keep an eye on his iPad to see how the display changes for him.
You're all done? Okay, we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good day. Have a good day.
Right, so here's everything he said. We'll talk about data collection a bit later on,
See you tomorrow.
but you can see here everything that he said. The clinician is reporting some data on it. All right, so let's take another look at a therapist who's modeling language with the ProLocal app, which is another common one used. And you'll see this is also a taxonomic grid.
Hi everyone, modeling something fun with Proloquo. Look at this. I have got a new toy. Can you tell what it is? Boing, boing, boing.
Pause it there for time, but again, you can see, and I want you to think about what kind of learner would be successful with a display like this. If it's an early learner with a limited vocabulary set, they may not need as many items. But if it is a learner who has more advanced language skills and they're able to construct, or they need access to a much larger vocabulary, then a robust profile may be the best fit for them. So again, there's lots of different system designs, but really consider the developmental level of the user and go through a proper assessment to determine which type of system design is best. All right, so I just want to end off our discussion on system design with, please do not forget the how. So again, the system design goes back to the way that the software and hardware are presented to the individual, but with each communication, language, speech, literacy goal, we really want to look at how is it being implemented. So we've listed some procedures here like prompting and prompt fading, differential reinforcement, functional communication training, manualized approaches such as the picture exchange communication system. These are all evidence-based procedures that you can use and implement. And of course, individualized for the user. Have also included something called Gestalt Language Processing, or GLP, as this is another one that we've commonly seen coming up during AAC Awareness Month. Now, what we do know about GLP is that this is not an evidence-based procedure, and we can share some more information about how GLP can be used and how it can be theorized. Let us know and contact us if you'd like us to share some resources. Siri Risen, who's an amazing SLP BCBA, has recently, in the past year, discussed this in length and would love to share her podcast as well. All right, so now let's talk about skills across the different verbal operands and take a verbal behavior approach to AAC programming. So when we're looking at the verbal operands, I want you to keep in mind AAC, let's take picture-based high-tech speech generating device. If you're using that to communicate, that's a modality. And there can be different types of modalities that an individual uses, such as speech or typing or picture exchange, all different types of modalities. Individuals can also be multimodal, and they could use more than one modality to communicate. So when we're looking at the operands, again, that analysis still stays the same. We're just considering the difference in the modality. All right, so we'll just do a very quick snapshot here. We've taken a VB-MAP level 1 profile on the side here and filled out this curriculum for an individual who has the profile here. So this would be a child or an individual who's at a developmental level of less than 30 months. And we want to show that when you're looking at building AAC goals for a profile at this level, what's really important is to look not just at AAC, but overall communication goals. So social communication skills, such as that joint attention or that shared attention, choice making, coordinated eye contact to request, use of gestures. So there's lots of non-vocal communication goals that should be considered for this profile. And at this stage, it may not be best to introduce a high-tech speech generating device because we don't want it to interfere with the development of these expressive communication goals. Now, with that being said, high-tech AAC can be an incredible tool as long as you have the right procedures in place to teach these other communication skills and communication goals. So we'll skip over to a comparison between a VB-MAPP level 3 profile. So this is about up to 48 months in development, and you can see on the curriculum assessment here, they've got a lot more skills that have been developed. Your AAC goals are going to look drastically different for an individual who's using their language functionally across lots of different operands. One thing we wanted to mention is that with your AAC goal, we always recommend building vocabulary at the single word level. It's often seen in programming that once you get your first 10 to 20 words, you want to jump right away to 2-word requesting and then 3-word requesting. But what we know from typical language development is that it's always important to continue to add words at the single word level. Think of yourself learning new words every day. So this is something that we cannot emphasize enough, is to continue building your vocabulary at the single word level to ensure that user is the most efficient communicator as possible. All right, so going across the verbal operands, let's start with the mand, which I'm sure everyone is quite familiar with. So we know when we're teaching communication skills and we're introducing an AAC, we know we want to start with building a solid and reliable mand repertoire or requesting repertoire. And this is essential before progressing to other verbal operands. So when you're, or if you're using high-tech speech generating device to do this, we would recommend using a simplified grid or a simplified system. And if it's an individual who doesn't have conditional discrimination skills, this is again something you must build into your programming. So again, would recommend the adapted text protocol or something similar to be implemented. What you can see here is an example of Linggo's quick chat. So this is a simplified taxonomic grid. You saw the young man in online school using this to tell his class to have a great day. But this can also be used as a beginning communication board. So you can start with just 2 tiles and then build up until you've got a nice variety. And again, making sure that you're using items that are most motivating, most meaningful for that individual, so they can really start to learn to advocate for themselves. Would also recommend to stick with nouns and verbs at this level. And again, when I say at this level, I'm talking here about individuals who are emergent communicators. They're building their very first words. All right, so here's an example of quick chat in action, since you haven't seen that one yet. So watch it because it's quite quick.
My way, please.
So you can see here, it's a simple select and the voice output is activated. Now, this is, again, something to consider when you're teaching your first functional communicative responses and you're using this to replace challenging behavior. We know that we need something extremely quick. The temporal contiguity is extremely important. And so we wouldn't recommend starting with something like the communicator or something that's requiring multiple presses because these first FCRs must be easier and more efficient than whatever behavior the individual is currently engaging in. All right, so you saw mand at the very beginner level. Now we're going to fast forward a bit and take a look at an individual who's doing some more advanced requesting. So this is a little girl who's playing this crunching squirrel game here with her mom. And her mom has taught her how to request for the different game pieces that she wants. Her mom was quite ambitious when she selected her language targets here. But what she's done is she's taken the system design and taken the skill of multiple word requesting using quantifiers, adjectives, verbs, and nouns, and she's outlined it in her communicator or in her system display. So it's as quick and easy as possible for this little girl to use. You'll also notice that she is multimodal. So while she is using her SGD to communicate, she's also using some vocal speech. All right, let's check it out here.
1, great.
1.
Yummy. You spit on that? Put it in. Hannah. Good job. Oh, figured it out. Let's get it out.
Strawberry.
You want 2 red strawberries? There you go.
Strawberry.
Mom can prepare some more in here since we know the spoon spits it out now.
All right. So again, I mentioned at the beginning, but want to highlight again, of the intervention studies published in AAC research, approximately half of them were targeting that simple requesting for objects and activities. So we saw on the quick chat how to build out your first words. We saw an example of this little girl requesting for items that she's clearly very motivated for, but oftentimes clinicians get stuck past there. And I would say it's because we don't have the procedures and the research to say how or what steps to follow in order to build. So this is where we'll rely upon our skills as behavior analysts in order to build these out. So let's talk about the more under-researched verbal operants. Want to move to the intraverbal, particularly looking at motivating fill-ins, because motivating fill-ins still have that motivational aspect similar to the mand, and also want to look at intraverbal tacting. So this is a term that Bondi had described a few years ago, and this means that you're responding differentially to questions regarding some dimension of an object, as you may know. So when we're looking at intraverbals, there's quite clearly different levels of complexity for intraverbals. So let's start with simple intraverbal fill-in.
Love this page.
All right, so this is a little girl engaged in and responding along with a book, Brown Bear, which she is quite motivated for. And this could start out with just a simple fill-in of the last word of the phrase, for example. So there's an embedded chain in books, especially repetitive books like Brown Bear. So it could start with simply filling in that last word, and then it could expand to something like you're seeing with this little girl here. So when we're looking at system design, she's using her communicator, so a schematic display, and she's going to do a more advanced intraverbal fill-in. You'll also hear the therapist asking her things like what is or who is, but again, there is, it's not a pure intraverbal because we do see the visual in the book there. So take a look at the antecedents at play, but note that we're not using a pure intraverbal. This is almost like a bridge.
Black sheep, what do you see?
Fish. Look, I see yours.
I see an orange fish looking at me. Amazing. Okay, turn the page. Teacher, what do you see? Yeah, turn the page. You got it. I see. What does the teacher see? I see.
All right. So before we continue the discussion on verbal operants, want to give you your second code word here. Second code word is AAC. Again, your second code word is AAC. Okay, and I can see some questions and answers coming through. Please continue to ask questions or feel free to make comments in the chat as we're going through, and we'll get to as many as we can during the question period. All right, now let's talk about very quickly the tact. So as we know, tacts are very differentiated from the mand, as that there's a different consequence at place here, and that's a social one. And with individuals with autism, they're not always going to be, and again, it very much depends on the individual, but may not always be motivated for social stimuli, so it may not have reinforcing properties. So that can be presented as a challenge for individuals who are learning tacting as a skill. Something that Sundberg highlights that's really important when we're looking at building verbal behavior programs is that tacts are such an important operand, because a lot of the higher order operands depend upon a strong tact. So if we do want to build strong interverbal repertoires and build pure interverbals, then we must not only have a strong mand repertoire, but also a strong tact repertoire.
You got it.
So let's take a look here again at a more advanced tacting program that's in place. So this is a very traditional IBI style program, so very contrived and very structured program. And the little girl here is labeling by feature, function, and class, and her therapist is using a receptive to tact transfer. So again, we've got some visual stimuli in the environment to consider that may be evoking her response. But you'll see how her AAC system is providing some of those visual supports. So check it out here. So therapist just said, who says squeak, squeak, squeak? She's gone into her free form, which is your taxonomic design, and she'll find the word mouse here.
Keep going.
Again, notice the response effort required.
Excellent. A mouse says squeak, squeak, squeak. You got it. Here we go. Which one's a vehicle? Excellent.
Goes to her free form again.
Which one's a vehicle?
Vehicle finds bike.
You are totally correct.
Right, I'm going to pause it here so we can keep going. And I'll just very briefly touch upon matrix training. So matrix training, as you may know, is a generative approach to instruction. And the main idea of it is teaching less and getting more out of it. So it's purposefully arranging your stimuli in a way that you can get more responses when in the way that you're teaching the two different components required. So if you'd like to learn more, I would encourage you to contact us. We do have some matrix training protocols we would love to share with you. Again, for time's sake, we'll just quickly go over this, but I would recommend for you to consider when you're teaching multi-word phrases, if it's appropriate for that individual, to take a look at how your vocabulary is displayed and make it the least amount of response effort required in order for that individual to make a selection. So whether that's using a schematic display or whether you're using a pop-up in order to more quickly get to your answer, really look at how your system design is displaying your vocabulary, and consider using matrix training as an advanced teaching procedure for your AAC users. Alice Schillingsberg and Sarah Frampton are two researchers that have amazing research out on this right now. Linggo is also doing some case study research on matrix training. So again, if you'd like to see our procedures, please reach out to us. All right, we'll skip next over to interverbal. So these are more complex interverbals, conversation and WH questions. So let's take a look at a boy who is having conversation with his therapist. They're talking about calendar, which again is a more structured activity. And you can see that it's displayed in a schematic design here. So his vocabulary has been customized to the calendar topic, and he's going to be answering some questions. He then makes a comment about the weather, as you'll see.
Will be Wednesday, September. Tomorrow will be Wednesday, September the 14th, 2022.
Got it. And what about yesterday? What day was yesterday?
yesterday. Monday.
Oh.
September. Well, yesterday, Monday, September the 12th, 2022.
Okay,
It is
the weather is,
sunny.
it is sunny. It is sunny. Let's look outside. Oh,
It is
All right, I'll pause this there, but again, you could see not only was he using his communicator, but he also chose to do some typing. So that's something we'll look at now, AAC and literacy skills. I want you to think back on some of the videos where you saw the individuals who had not only pictures, but also words attached to their word tiles. So I'll explain that in the next few slides. But when we were discussing the complexity of teaching tax to individuals, want to open up the discussion of the further difficulty of teaching tax to AAC users. Because technically, if it is an image or a picture, it's not necessarily a pure tact, but rather a non-identical match to sample. And so if we are looking at building really strong communicators who are truly tacting, then we can't with confidence say that they're doing that if they're using picture-based communication. Further to that, how do we know if we're reliably building our intraverbals if we're relying on picture-based match to sample? And so one of the solutions we want to explore is transitioning from picture-based communication to text-based communication. So as we know, literacy skills are incredibly important for all individuals. And for AAC users, there's often an assumption that since they have exposure to words via pictures, that they may automatically learn how to decode sight words. But as clinicians, we know that that's not necessarily true. By statically pairing two items, that does not mean there's any learning process taking place. However, we can teach these via different teaching strategies, one of them being prompting and prompt fading. So we'd like to share a feature that's included on Linggo called Transition to Text, and this looks at the development of sight word decoding. Just going to skip here to a study that was done by Light and McNaughton that looked at what they called transition to literacy as a feature. We don't have time to go through today, but I'd encourage you all to take a look at that one. And also the theory behind transition to text or transition to literacy is RFT, or relational frame theory. So also some resources for you to go through there. There's been a lot of good research on using it to establish derived mands. And you can see the stimulus equivalence triangle here. When we're going from picture to text-based learning using transition to text, is we're systematically fading the image out over time so that it's just the text remaining. So we're using within stimulus fading. And if you're using this on Linggo, you can select how it's fading out, whether that's by size or transparency, how quickly it's fading out, and whether this is being done consecutively or only when marked as independent. If you'd like to implement a transition to text procedure using low-tech, you can simply do this by creating a picture binder using an overlay like a sheet protector and fading the picture out by physically cutting or coloring it or by cutting it out. So there's different options depending on your modality, but based on Light and McNaughton's research, would suggest doing a procedure like this if you're looking at sight word decoding as a target skill. Just a note, if you are looking at this and that's an important target for your learner, you want to ensure that there's very strong conditional discrimination and generalized matching across both items and pictures. And we'll look here at the development from text-based communication to typing, which by some can be considered a topographical rather than selection-based system. So have a quick look at how this appears. This little girl is going to tell us here. So she saw a cat, she vocalized an approximation, and then she said cat. All right, so we are about to wrap up our time here with Hi Rasmus. So I'm going to skip us over to the end, but I would definitely like to encourage you to go through the rest of the slides and all of the resources on your own, and to please contact us further with any questions. We have lots of info here on data collection, on evidence-based practice, but we really want to leave you with this takeaway during AAC Awareness Month to focus on the individual in front of you and look at the individualization of AAC procedures for your unique learners. There we are. Thank you so much, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jane. That was fabulous. I did put the form in the chat, and I'm going to give the last word in just a minute. If Jane, you don't mind sharing your screen, I'm going to put one thing up here real quick. And well, it is not going up there, so let me just go here. But thank you all so much for joining us. We are going to have a little bit of time for question and answers. Our last word is awareness. So go ahead and you can click on the link in the chat and make sure you put in your 3 keywords there. And thank you so much for just taking time out of your day to learn and grow with us. And we would love to stay connected as well. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we will go ahead and have a little bit of time to answer your questions. So thank you all so much. Go here.